Richard sat at the kitchen table, the DNA test results between his trembling fingers. His heart pounded in his chest like a drum. From a young age, he always believed he was the spitting image of his dad, both in looks and demeanor. But the document in his hands promised a different story, an entirely different narrative to his life script. His palms were sweaty, and his mouth dry, but the truth was laid bare before him. He was not his father's son. Earlier that week, a casual conversation with his daughter, Emma, about genealogy encouraged him to take a DNA test as part of the family tree project she was working on for school. It seemed a fun idea at the time, a way to connect with his family heritage. But now, as he stared at the test results, he wished he'd kept that part of his history locked away. Leaving the papers on the table, Richard found himself gravitating towards the family room where old photographs lined the walls. All those smiles, vacation pictures, and candid moments now felt tainted by an invisible lie. He felt a deep sense of betrayal, a sharp stab in the heart from the people he trusted most. Later that evening, when the house was filled with the familiar sounds of home, Emma practicing her violin, his wife Lucy making dinner, and a football game on the television, Richard couldn't hold it in any longer. He called a family meeting. The mood in the room shifted as he laid the papers down in the center of the coffee table. His voice was barely a whisper when he told them what he had discovered. Lucy was the first to react, her face blanching as she glanced at the results. Emma looked bewildered, a single string on her violin echoing through the tense silence. "Dad, what does this mean?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Richard focused on Lucy, his wife of 25 years. "What does this mean, Lucy?" he echoed. The quiet yet forceful question hung in the air like smoke. Lucy sat down heavily, her eyes not meeting his. There was a long, strained pause before she spoke. I don't know what to say," she began, her voice breaking. "We never thought it would come out like this." "We?" Richard asked, feeling the knot in his stomach tighten. "Who else knows about this?" As Lucy hesitated, Richard felt his world tipping on its axis. His parents? Other family members? How many of these comforting faces in his life's photo album were complicit in this lie? Unable to face the truth without more evidence, Richard spent the following days in a haze. He rifled through drawers and boxes in the attic, places where old records, birth certificates, and forgotten mementos were stored. Each document was a potential clue, each photo a possible lie. Days turned into restless nights as he pieced together fragments of information. It was during one of these long nights that Richard stumbled upon old newspaper articles stuffed in a dusty folder, hidden beneath stacks of old letters. One headline, in particular, caught his eye: a crime story about an unsolved case involving a prominent family in their old neighborhood from decades ago. The more he read, the deeper his confusion grew. The crime remained unsolved, but there were names mentioned, associates of his family, that seemed too coincidental. Connections began to form in Richard's mind, weaving an intricate web that linked his newly discovered heritage to a mystery long buried. In the following days, with a fire lit in his heart, Richard reached out to distant relatives, individuals he had only ever heard about in passing. He needed answers, and he was determined to leave no stone unturned. What he learned from these conversations both shocked and intrigued him, leading him ever closer to uncovering a truth that would reshape his understanding of family and legacy. Richard's search for the truth had become an obsession. Every phone call, every cryptic message from afar revealed yet another layer of complexity. He began to wonder if he was on the verge of uncovering something that should have remained hidden. But a relentless drive pushed him forward, the need to understand his place in the world overriding any fear of what he might find. One evening, while sifting through family documents, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Marianne, a cousin he had never spoken to until his recent inquiries began. Her message was brief: "We need to talk. Meet me at the cafe on Maple Street tomorrow at 3 p.m. There's something you need to know about our family." The next day, Richard arrived at the cafe early, nerves jangling with anticipation. The air was thick with the smell of coffee and pastries, but the usual comfort it brought him was lost today. He watched as Marianne entered, a woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes and an air of seriousness. He stood up to greet her, but she waved him back into his seat. As they sat, Marianne wasted no time with pleasantries. "Richard, I know you've been digging. It's about time someone did," she said, her voice a mixture of resolve and fatigue. "This family has secrets. Ugly ones." "Tell me everything," Richard replied, his voice low but insistent. Marianne took a deep breath, then began. "Your grandfather, John, was not the man everyone thought he was. He was involved in some very shady dealings back in the 60s. He was good at keeping up appearances, but there were rumors I now know to be true that he had ties to organized crime." Richard sat back, shock rippling through him. "But what does that have to do with me, with my DNA results?" Marianne looked him straight in the eye. "Those ties weren't just business. There was a personal connection too. One of his business partners was more than just that. She was his mistress. And they had a child." The room seemed to tilt as Richard absorbed this new information. "Are you saying?" "Yes," Marianne confirmed softly. "Your biological mother was not the woman who raised you. The woman you called Grandma, your father's mother, took you in after your real mother disappeared. She raised you as her own, with everyone's silent agreement to keep it secret. No one wanted the scandal." Richard's mind raced. Questions screamed in his head. Where is my real mother now? What happened to her? Marianne's expression darkened. "No one knows for sure. She vanished without a trace. Some say she left town, others whisper that something more sinister may have happened. With your grandfather's connections, anything is possible." His world felt like a fragile glass globe, smashed into pieces around him. "And my father? Lucy? Did they know? Lucy?" "Probably not at first, though your dad knew about the affair eventually. He chose silence to protect the family name. It's possible that Lucy learned later on, but by then, they were already building their own family with you and Emma." Richard sat in stunned silence, the weight of this generational deceit pressing down on him. Every memory, every family gathering twisted now in this new light. It was as if his entire life had been a carefully constructed lie, each piece fitting together to uphold a broken facade. "Why didn't anyone tell me? Why keep it a secret all this time?" Marianne sighed, leaning back slightly. "Richard, people do crazy things to protect those they love, or to hide their own shame. Sometimes both. This family, for all its faults, thought they were doing the right thing. But they weren't, were they?" His voice was sharp, anger beginning to lace every word. "They just wanted to avoid scandal at the cost of my own identity." Marianne nodded, empathy in her gaze. "Probably. But now the choice is yours, you can keep digging, or you can choose to let some things remain in the past." Richard left the cafe with more questions than answers, his heart a tumultuous storm of emotions. The truth he had sought had opened a door he wasn't sure he was ready to walk through, but turning back felt impossible. The pull of knowing, truly knowing, was too strong. Back home, he found Lucy waiting for him. Her face was a picture of concern and uncertainty. She must have sensed his tension lately, the distance growing between them. "Richard, are you okay?" she asked tentatively, approaching him cautiously. He looked at her, his heart heavy with the weight of everything he now knew. "Lucy, we need to talk." The words came out firm, yet tinged with a sadness that mirrored the pain in his heart. Sitting down with her, he recounted everything he had learned, watching her face as each revelation landed. There was shock, confusion, and eventually tears, but also a kind of grim acceptance. "I had my suspicions," she confessed quietly. "Your parents were always so guarded, especially your father. I thought it was just their way, but now." Richard felt a pang of loss at the life he thought he knew. "And what about us, Lucy?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What are we supposed to do now?" Lucy reached across the table, her hand finding his. "We find out the rest together, if that's what you want. We build something real from this shattered past." Her words were a balm to his bruised heart, a spark of hope amidst the ruins. But he knew the journey was far from over. They had to confront his father, to demand the full truth. And there was still the matter of the unsolved crime, the hint of danger lurking in his bloodline. He needed closure, needed to know if the framework of his life held an even darker secret. As night fell and the house settled into a quiet lull, Richard knew that the path ahead would not be easy. But with Lucy by his side and Emma's future to consider, he was ready to face whatever truths lay ahead. Yet the biggest confrontation was yet to come, and it promised to unravel the delicate threads of family loyalty that had held his world together for so long. The next morning, Richard woke with a sense of purpose mingled with dread. He had decided to confront his father, to put all the cards on the table and understand the full extent of the tangled web they called family. After a quiet breakfast, one where Emma's innocent chatter felt both comforting and haunting, Richard steeled himself for the drive to his parents' house. The journey there felt surreal, as if the world outside the car was a movie he was watching from a distance. Trees and buildings passed by, but his mind was stuck in loops of questions and half-formed confrontations. He needed to keep a level head, to not let the anger he felt overwhelm the need for answers. When he arrived at his parents' house, the familiar facade felt imbued with new meanings. Here, secrets had lived hidden in plain sight, beneath birthday parties and holiday gatherings. As he stepped up to the front door, he took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of courage he had. His father, Walter, was sitting in the living room with a newspaper, his habitual morning routine. Seeing Richard enter, Walter's face broke into a welcoming smile that quickly faded into concern at the sight of his son's grim expression. "Richard, to what do I owe the surprise?" Richard didn't bother with pleasantries. "Dad, we need to talk. Now." Walter nodded, gesturing to the sofa, his demeanor shifting to something more guarded as he folded the newspaper. "All right then, what's this about?" As Richard sat, he felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "I know about the DNA test. About Grandpa John and everything. Mary Ann told me what she knew." The color drained from Walter's face, his lips pressing into a thin line. He seemed to age right then, the weight of long-held secrets pressing down on him. "I see," he said quietly, casting his gaze down to the floor. "What exactly did she say?" "That I'm not who I thought I was," Richard replied, bitterness creeping into his voice. "That my biological mother wasn't the woman who raised me. Dad, why did you never tell me? Why keep this from me?" Walter leaned back, letting out a long, exhausted sigh. "Richard, you have to understand. Back then, things were different. Family honor, reputation, it mattered so much. Your grandfather was a complicated man. He loved fiercely but could be ruthless. But this isn't just about reputation, Dad. This is my life. My identity. Didn't I have the right to know?" Walter nodded, a flicker of regret and resolve in his eyes. "You did. And for that, I'm sorry. I was young, and I chose the path that seemed least disruptive. Your grandmother, she wanted to give you a stable life, free from the shadow of John's mistakes." Richard clenched his fists, fighting the tide of emotions. What about my real mother? Was her disappearance really a choice? Or was there more to it? The question hung in the air, a specter neither could ignore. Walter hesitated, then spoke with a reluctance that hinted at deeper truths. "She loved you, Richard. Whatever happened, she would never have left by choice." But beyond that, his voice trailed off, a sadness settling into his features. "There are things I still don't fully understand. Your grandfather's dealings were murky. Dangerous." The implication was clear, and Richard's heart twisted at the thought of what his real mother might have endured. "Did you ever try to find out more, to uncover what happened to her?" Walter shook his head, guilt shadowing his eyes. "I tried, but every lead dried up. Doors closed faster than I could open them. After a while, I had to make peace with it for your sake. Richard sat silently, absorbing the enormity of his father's words. The urge to dig deeper, to seek justice for his mother surged within him. But he also felt a tug of understanding, seeing the man before him not just as a bearer of secrets, but as a son himself, caught in the crossfire of familial duty and personal loss. Eventually, Walter spoke again, a note of determination in his voice. "Tell me what you want to do, Richard. Whatever it is, I will support you. You deserve to find the truth, even if it means unraveling what's left of our family's name." Richard looked at his father, seeing the regret etched into the lines of his face. He knew that moving forward meant not just pursuing the truth for his own sake, but also understanding the man who had tried, in his own flawed way, to protect him. "I want to know everything," Richard declared, the conviction in his voice unshakable. "I want to find out what happened to my mother, and if her disappearance links back to the unsolved crime I've been reading about." Walter nodded, a mix of pride and trepidation in his eyes. "Then we'll do it together. I've been scared for too long, but this is your journey now. I'll help in any way I can." With that promise, Richard and Walter began to sift through the past, revisiting old contacts, and reaching out to anyone who might shed light on the shadowy events of the past. Each call, each meeting was another piece to a puzzle that stretched back decades, touching lives and destinies beyond Richard's own. As weeks turned into months, the trail led them through stories of betrayal, hidden alliances, and shadowy figures who thrived in the spaces between law and chaos. And slowly, a picture began to form of a mother caught in a web she couldn't escape from, of choices made under duress, and a lineage marked by secrets and survival. The search brought Richard face to face with parts of his family history that were both painful and enlightening. It was a journey through time, exploring not just his roots, but the very fabric of what defines family and identity. As the answers gradually emerged, Richard felt a cathartic blend of anger, sorrow, and acceptance. Yet, lurking beneath the surface of these revelations, there lay a more sinister truth, one tied to the crime that had haunted his grandfather's past. It was an enigma that promised to unravel further as Richard braced himself for the next steps, knowing that the deeper he dug, the closer he came to facing the full brunt of his family's legacy. As Richard and Walter continued their investigation, the threads began to weave together into a tapestry of deceit and buried truths. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that the past was not something that could be ignored or hidden. It demanded to be faced, to be acknowledged, if any peace was to be found. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Richard received a phone call from a private investigator he'd hired months ago, a man with a reputation for finding the unfound. The investigator had tracked down an old associate of his grandfather's, a man named Frank Donovan, who was willing to talk after years of silence. The meeting was set in a small, out-of-the-way diner, the kind of place where secrets felt safe in the corners. Richard and Walter arrived early, the tension between them palpable but unified in purpose. When Frank finally entered, Richard couldn't help but scrutinize him, trying to gauge the man's intentions. Frank was old now, his frame stooped and hair a wiry gray, but his eyes were sharp, carrying a weight of stories untold. "Thank you for meeting with us," Richard said as they settled into the booth. Frank nodded, his movements deliberate. "I've got a life full of regrets, but your mother, she didn't deserve what happened to her." Richard's heart raced. "What do you know about her disappearance?" Frank sighed, a sound heavy with years of burden. "Your grandfather was a powerful man, but he made enemies. He was caught up in things beyond his control towards the end. Your mother, she was a pawn in a game that turned deadly." Richard sat still, his inhale sharp. "Was she did something happen to her?" Frank looked Richard squarely in the eye. "She disappeared because she was running. She found out something she wasn't supposed to. About a deal that went wrong, a police officer who died because of it. She tried to get out, to protect you. And John, well, he couldn't let that come to light." Walter's face turned ashen, the truth settling over him like a cold wave. "So my father, he ordered." "I don't know the details," Frank admitted, but I do know she was in contact with someone in the police. She trusted someone to help her disappear. Whether she made it or not, only that person would know. For the first time, Richard felt a glimmer of hope. Do you know who she trusted? Frank nodded gravely. Yes, but he's a hard man to find. He retired early, vanished from the radar, but I've got a lead. Someone who knew him, who might still be in contact. The lead brought them to a quiet town a few hours' drive away, to a retired detective, a man named Joseph Hadley. The meeting was arranged with a cautious optimism, Richard and Walter both anxious and hopeful. They met Joseph in a park, a wide open space where their conversation could float away on the breeze. Joseph was wiry and alert, his eyes speaking of a life spent solving puzzles and untangling knots. He listened patiently as Richard explained their quest, the pieces of the past he hoped to find. When I heard about her plan, I couldn't let it go, Joseph said finally, his voice like gravel. Your mother contacted me because she needed documentation, a new identity. I helped her as best as I could to escape John's clutches. Where is she now? Richard asked, the question a plea. Joseph paused, his gaze distant, as if seeing into the past. She made it out and started a new life. But it wasn't easy, and she went through hell to get there. I lost track after a while. She cut all ties when it got too dangerous. Richard felt a mix of relief and heartache. She had survived, made it out of the darkness, but she was still a ghost in his life. Will you help us find her? Joseph nodded, a glint of determination in his eyes. I can try. I owe her that much. Armed with new hope, Richard and Joseph delved deep into records, following scant leads and whispers. The journey was arduous, each dead end a blow, each new clue a beacon of hope. Walter was there every step of the way, buoyed by his son's resolve and the possibility of finally making things right. Finally, after months of searching, they traced her to a small coastal town. The moment was surreal and overwhelming. Richard stood on the porch of a quaint little house, his nerves a symphony of anxiety and anticipation. Walter stood beside him, a reassuring presence. When the door opened, it revealed a woman whose eyes were unmistakably like Richard's, filled with depth and life stories untold. She was older, the years traced on her face, but there was strength in her stance, a quiet resilience. Mom. Richard's voice wavered, the word a tentative bridge across a lifetime of separation. Her breath caught, tears shimmering in her eyes. Richard the First never thought I would see you again. They embraced, the world around them falling away as past and present collided. The weight of missing years, of aching separation, dissolved in the reassurance of a long-awaited reunion. Inside, they talked for hours, piecing together their lives like a tapestry of moments regained. She shared stories Richard had yearned to hear, tales of her love and longing, her reasons for running, and her life in hiding. Walter watched, a spectator to the healing of the rift his father had created. Seeing his son find a piece of himself brought its own kind of peace, an atonement for years spent in the shadow of silence. In the months that followed, Richard and his mother began to rebuild their relationship, cautious yet determined. Walter sought redemption in small gestures, bridging gaps created by misunderstandings and choices long made. The truth didn't erase the past, but it gave them the clarity to move forward, to redefine what family meant. They had faced their demons, confronted the legacy of secrets, and emerged into light stronger, more united than ever. The journey had taught Richard that family was more than blood or history, it was a choice, a commitment to stand by one another even when the truth threatened to tear them apart. It was a lesson hard-earned, but deeply cherished, one that gave him the courage to embrace his identity and the future still unfolding before them.